So I'm a bit of a portfolio academic, so a bit like Kate said, I was quite desperate to do either Islamic studies or PPE. My dad's a physicist, my mum's an epidemiologist, and they were like, oh gosh, Maxine, you're quite good at physics, you're quite good at science, maybe you should go down a scientific route. But I was very much kind of wedded to the arts until pretty much the final moment. I then saw the light and thought, actually, I'm going to do a kind of social science master's, and so I studied a health economics master's at the LSE. And then I became quite disillusioned studying that master's, thinking, well, you know, these enormous health problems are coming at us when we've got these quite sort of fluffy and ineffective policies to solve some of the world's biggest health challenges. So how can we use tech to do that? Now, the LSE, as some of you might know, is not the world's biggest leader in technology and science. And so as a result of that, I started exploring the kind of women in tech scene in London. And through some of the many initiatives that are looking to particularly uptrain and upskill women in particularly programming, I discovered R and Python and the value of being able to create really cool pieces of kit via programming. So I thought, well, how can you merge big macro modeling, neuroscience, and programming? And so I'm currently, as Helen said, mining medical records to find new predictors for dementia. I'm halfway through. Those of you who have PhDs will know this is a particularly bleak time in my life. So yeah, in a year and a half, hopefully I will have a PhD. But I also absolutely bloody love health technology, digital health, the world of medical innovation. It's a really exciting place to be. I've had a really good time exploring it, and I've come at it from various different angles, including how can you techify beauty at L'Oreal. So when we kind of say what is digital health, what is health technology, I always find that quite an interesting us and them. So we usually say the world of digital health and health tech, and then you have health now. And I don't think that's a particularly helpful way of looking at it. You know, increasingly, health and health technology are becoming interwoven. They're one and the same. Our healthcare is increasingly dependent on technology. The future of health is technology dependent. So I have to say that this us and them isn't the most helpful distinction when it comes to the articulation. But this is what the future of health is, and actually this is at present what we have. If you can see all these little kind of gimmicky gadgets, they're obviously incredible pieces of kit, but you know, everything comes from scanning your skin to look at moles to urine analysis. You don't pee on your smartphone, I might as well point that out. Glucometers in contact lenses. There's lots of really amazing pieces of kit being built around healthcare. But at the moment, we're still kind of in the state of digitizing the status quo. A lot of health technology at the moment is still not fundamentally reshaping the way we deliver care. And there are organizations like Dr. Care Anywhere that are, you know, doing the uphill battle of the cultural change, which is not just about digitizing the status quo. So whilst I was exploring this world of health technology and kind of starting to dip my toe into it, I thought, I made an interesting observation. Healthcare, loads of women. Health technology, no women. And I thought this was quite bizarre given the fact that healthcare was so female dominated. So I, a couple of years ago, went out to Silicon Valley purely just to drink Kool-Aid. Everyone said it's such a banging place to go and hang out, so I just went to hang out for a month. I would recommend it to everyone. It's quite an interesting kind of anthropological experience. If you want to, find the world's biggest megalomaniacs in one small area, that is a really good place to go. But there is, if any of you have been there, it is an incredible environment to be. Everyone is relentlessly positive, relentlessly enthusiastic, and it's quite an inspiring place to be for a bit. And I think there's a degree to which British cynicism helps mediate the hype. But whilst I was out there, I met these women who'd founded a network called Health Tech Women. And at that point I thought, yeah, that's an interesting one actually. And these women had founded it because they thought, well, we're working in healthcare, we're trying to drive the future of it, and we don't have any women around us in the room. So when I was in the UK, I started looking around me and noticing interesting things like this. So some of you will probably not be familiar with this, but this is the lesser spotted site of the queue for the men's loos. So this is at a conference called Deep Learning in Healthcare. The network, One Health Tech that I run, was actually brought on board to try and get more women attending and speaking, and despite our best efforts, this was still the outcome of the Boys Loos. And I have to say that the queues for the Boys Loos is actually quite a good metric of the diversity at a conference. So I would use that as a kind of general ranking. It does actually work quite well. So then I thought, well, let's have a look at kind of the UK landscape. What's happening here? So we did some kind of digging and found that 77% of the NHS are female. So we thought, well, actually, there's probably not a huge amount of demand to run a women's group to do with healthcare here. If anything, there needs to be a bit of a men's support group. But then we did some further digging and found the roles that we would kind of commonly associate with the innovator type roles, the technical roles, the people who are kind of pushing the boundaries of the future of healthcare. And the numbers look considerably bleaker given the fact that 77% is your kind of sector baseline. So for me, the numbers that really jump out at me are that 9% of medtech companies are female founded, less than 5% of engineers in the NHS are women, and only 15% of university spin-outs are led by women. And these numbers are really low when you look at the fact that 77% of the NHS is female. So let's start a community, they said. It would be fun. So when I was out in San Francisco and I met these women who found this network called Health Tech Women, I thought, you know what, there's a need for this in the UK. We have the same situation, and there's definitely scope just to see what the thirst is here. So a year and a half ago, I was very nervous, and I was at this big conference called NHS Expo, which is kind of the technology conference for the NHS, and I went up to the technology director for the NHS, and I said, hi, Beverly Bryant, my name's Maxine, and I'm sort of setting up this woman in health technology group, and I'd love your help. And this is probably the most senior woman in health technology in the country. And she kind of drags me along, she's like, you're coming with me, I'm going to introduce you to an amazing lady. And I thought, gosh, okay, so I'm kind of scurrying off after this incredible woman, and she introduces me to this woman called Louise Sinclair, who seems to be the most prolific, well-connected woman in the world of health technology. And this woman is twice my age, hasn't gone to university, has 2 small kids, lives up in the north. I pretty much had never been north of Watford Gap until about 2 years ago. And together we thought, let's set something up together, and let's see what the thirst is here. So a year and a half ago, we put on our first event, and it was just to see what the interest is. And then almost a year and a half later now, we're 11,000 members strong across the country in 6 hubs in the UK. We have, in fact, our Liverpool hub leader here, who's been immensely patient with us because we are predominantly a volunteer-led organisation. And I have to say, we weren't quite expecting 11,000 people to get involved. So I have to say that our hubs have been very patient with us in terms of managing how we can grow together. So given the speed and pace at which we grew, and the fact that we did have day jobs, we had bills to pay, we started to have some interesting difficulties when it came to working with our American counterparts. They had been going for 5 years. They had 2,000 members. The language was very loaded in sort of private healthcare, and people are quite sensitive in the UK about private healthcare. And also people in the UK, by and large, don't like to be told what to do by Americans. So we found this was getting increasingly difficult to work together. So we, in the kind of words of Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, we consciously uncoupled in the summer. And we set up as One Health Tech. And I'll go into that just a bit at the end as to why we chose that name, because it's quite an important discussion to be had when looking at diversity and inclusion in healthcare. So we are what most networks do. We run events, we run mentorship schemes, we look to kind of support and promote more women, we profile women, we help some SMEs get funding, we generally connect people into the health service, and we just try and create a bit of a buzz. So why does diversity matter? We're told it matters, right? And you're like, you should have more women on your board, you should have more black and ethnic minorities on your board, and you're like, oh, okay. But then it's quite kind of hard to always realise why you need to. Now, Justin Trudeau, man from my own heart, had a fantastic response when he was asked about this. He was just like, because it's 2015. But by and large, people looking to sponsor you want a bit more information than that. So I'm just going to give you one example of if you don't have diversity and you don't get it right in healthcare, it can go very, very wrong. I'm just going to give you one example of this from a data perspective. So are any of you familiar with the Tay tweets scandal that happened? I mean, it's probably the most awkward PR disaster ever. But basically, Microsoft created this AI Twitter bot, and effectively within a few hours it became a racist, misogynistic neo-Nazi, which is obviously not good when it comes to AI PR. And the reason is because when you train algorithms on data sets that are not balanced, representative, or have or don't are biasless, then you're going to build in those biases into what your algorithms are churning out. So what does that mean? What's an example of that in healthcare? There are 3 key areas when you're looking at algorithmic bias, and the one I'm going to talk about today is data inputs. But this is so the data sets you're using to train your algorithms on, the way you're actually processing it, and also like the culture of data science are all very important things when it comes to this. So when you're looking at inputs, there's this big mantra of rubbish in, rubbish out when it comes to data science. So if you feed crap data into an algorithm, you're going to get crap results. This is kind of being widely understood. And we're starting now to really see that the systemic omission of, say, underrepresented groups in some of these data sets really has the potential to exacerbate current inequalities and further marginalize currently marginalized groups. So a really good example of this would be homelessness in healthcare. Often don't present as much in electronic health records. If you're building systems based on EHR data, you're not going to be recording and capturing those individuals. But an example in healthcare is I'm going to use clinical trials. So here you have your fine, perfect specimen for a clinical trial. You have a 25-year-old fit, healthy Caucasian male. And this is what most clinical trials for the past century have been based on. And hey, men and women respond differently to drugs. Up until 2005, 80% of medicines in the US were removed from market because, temporarily or permanently, because of side effects on women, which is quite flabbergasting. 80% of drugs were taken off because they were killing or hurting women. That's quite baffling. So the NIH in America has actually funded almost $10 million worth of research projects to look specifically at how women can respond differently in clinical trials. But it's quite hard to get women into clinical trials. And there's kind of three main reasons. So one, historic reasons. We like to replicate previous clinical trials. If previous clinical trials were on men, you want to replicate that. Secondly, economic reasons. Women are very expensive to get into clinical trials. The people often have the most dependents at home. They have periods, which is problematic because often you need to kind of counter signatures for things like contraception in clinical trials. There's been big efforts to get more in participating in them, but the big issue now is that there's been a big push in looking at new indications for drugs. So there's been a huge push in mining these old clinical data sets to see how we can reuse drugs, how we can find new targets for those drugs based on previously done clinical trials. And this is a very lucrative area because obviously clinical trials are very expensive, £1.6 billion a year to develop a drug. So I think lots of people are getting very concerned now that previously imbalanced clinical trials are now being brought up again and remined, and you're going to again have the same gender problems in those clinical trials. And there's tons and tons of examples for this, but I have to say neurosciences, when it comes to studies and trials, are the worst. So they have on average a 5-to-1 ratio of men to women. And next quick example is medical school admissions. So this is actually St. George's. They did a kind of pre-selection for their medical school admissions because they had so many applicants, and they thought, this might be quite a good way of sifting out the bad applicants before. And basically, their algorithm found that the women and black and ethnic minorities were less good applicants. So actually, they were negatively weighted even before CV and application phase. Now, luckily for St. George's, they realised this, but they talked about this quite a lot and said, this is a real danger of what you can do if you depend too much on algorithmic processing. And this is particularly pertinent in the fact that if any of you read the JAMA study, women are actually better doctors. So not only are you not letting women into medical school as much, but you'd actually be killing people more because you have less good doctors. So efforts like One Health Tech and evenings like tonight is obviously just kind of one scratching the surface of how we can start talking about this. But for me, the big thing is actually, we're talking about women, very important. If you're looking at kind of a nice tree diagram, you can divide it gender, that's fantastic. There's obviously lots of things that make us who we are. This is my cake of intersectionality. Gender, sexuality, age, race, nationalities, these are all things that kind of make you you, but by and large, it's the fact that you're going to approach a question differently to someone else. You're going to have different skill sets, you're going to have different disciplines. And really, if you want to drive innovation, it's about getting every single kind of breadth. It's not as simple as just getting more women into a room. So we had to rename for One Health Tech because I was being A, sued, B, we wanted to make sure that we were being more inclusive to men and make the point of the fact that it's about representation and inclusivity. It's not about just being aggressively kind of beating at the door of womanhood. But nevertheless, there are still major challenges that women experience, and we are definitely aware of that. And so even though we are championing better inclusivity and representation in healthcare, women certainly still get a bit of a raw deal. So junior doctors, the contract certainly negatively affected single mothers more. Surgery, very famous for being an all-boys club, 11% of surgeons are female. And a really good report actually by the Francis Crick Institute basically said if we continue at the rate we are, only having 22% of professors who are female, it's going to take us over 150 years to get gender balance at professor level. So that's a pretty, I don't know about you, I can't be bothered to wait 150 years. So the last thing I wanted to end on is a quote by Claire Marks, who's actually the first female president of the Royal College of Surgeons. I thought this was a very good quotation. She said, "We can't tell people to change their culture. What we have to do is grow the numbers and show the way we can change the culture from within rather than dictating." And certainly from One Health Tech perspective, that's really what we're about. We don't want to stand up and talk about being women. We just want to put amazing women up on stage, broker women into fantastic conferences, connect women to other people, and just slowly and bit by bit, you'll put role models into places they might not have seen. Or it's just changing the holding or landing page on a website so you see more women's faces. Those sorts of subtle differences can be much more powerful than standing up and talking about the fact you have a vagina. And I think that's me. Done. Yeah. Fantastic.